My name is Laura Carpenter, and I have two pieces in this show, Hungry Heads and Fate's Roulette. Both pieces are made of repurposed materials or found objects. And this one, Hungry Heads, represents Scylla as she gazes down upon her monstrous self, wondering what became of her. The other one is a fidget spinner, kind of on a large scale, and on the top is the comedy and tragedy masks from Greek drama from 500 to 300 BCE. As you spin it, it will land in either a comedy or tragedy mask.
Okay, my name is Monica DeSalvo. I'm a graphic designer and artist living in Arlington. The paintings came about many years ago, taking a course with Adria Arch in non-representational art. She was trying to get us to shed self-consciousness, and one of the assignment prompts was make something ugly, which was really hard for me. And you know, she started out first with ugly colors, and we went through all these exercises. I went home and I worked on these assignments, and I ended up doing these really quick portraits of mostly people I knew that were difficult for me and had some like underlying ugliness, either through what they made me feel about myself or just the dynamic between the 2 or 3 or 4 of us, but there was like an ugliness of human being beneath the surface. And I started painting these things, and I'd start with the nose and just kind of, so start in the middle and just kind of go out from there. And I didn't think about what I was doing, and I just slapped things on. And this is what the result was. When the assignment was presented to me, I immediately thought about that statement that my friend said, everyone thinks the danger is out there, but it's sitting right next to us. It's in our own family. And that brought me back to these portraits, which have literally been in a portfolio for over 10 years. No one has seen them, and I love them, and I always wanted to do something with them. And now here, it's as if it was meant to be. So here I present my ugly portraits.
Well, I am Liz Sibley Fletcher. I am an artist from Mason, New Hampshire, which is just over the border west of Nashua, so it's not deep in the woods, but we are kind of woodsy out in Mason. And I've been a clay sculptor for about 45 years. And I made a series of these insects because it seems like, well, maybe still it's true, we don't know, insects may inherit the earth, whatever's going to happen, because they're pretty tough. And this one was the ruler of all. She is the empress, and she is pregnant with many other future generations of rulers, and she has no mercy. Her eyes look quite terrible. I mean, she's really so scary. I hadn't realized, you know, you make a work of art. I made her, probably more, well, certainly more than a decade ago. And then you make them, and now and then they travel around and visit other works of art in different galleries. But I hadn't looked at her closely for a long time. And it's like, goodness. And she's made all entirely of clay. She is hollow, and her parts are built up bit by bit. Each arm was sculptured separately, and when the clay was wet, I squeezed it to make the spikes come out, and her various little armors that stick out, they're just the wet clay disc was poked and pulled to make them come out all sharp. Because part of the idea of having a very formidable figure is not just bulk, but sharpness too. So she has all that. And it's quite neat, the idea of having the monsters here that Mim has decided. So I'm happy for her to come out, and it's really quite lovely.
Hello, I'm Madeleine Lord, and I know Mim, and we've worked together in other shows. And when she sends you an email and says, would you like to make me a Scylla? And we're in the middle of COVID, and I find metal scraps in order to work, and I can't go find any new ones. I said, sure, why not? I'd love to, Mim. And went out to my metal scrap yard, thinking, uh-oh, what am I gonna do? And lo and behold, a previous version of myself had figured this all out, and I have this wonderful, wrinkly, rusty, holy, waterlogged piece, and this most peculiar tentacled, silver, suckered thing that I'd had no idea why I brought them home. And I stuck them together, and I put them on a saw blade. You can see the teeth maybe. And then a little circular collar to uplift them. And I was so pleased with myself that in the middle of COVID, I could make something outrageous and scary and funny. And so I sent a picture of it through Instagram to my buddies, and one of them wrote back right away, well, that's nice. Very feminine, very scary, but where's Charybdis? So then I went on Google and looked at pictures, and Charybdis was equally evil and swallowed up sailors whole and seduced and did all kinds of machinations. And I had to go once more to my metal pile, which had been so generous for Scylla, and say, do I have a Charybdis? And over here, you'll see that within 4 pieces of metal, I did it. I found this enormous wiggly thing, which is what I would call a greedy piece, because it just really has to be what it is, and it doesn't work well with others. It had a big eyeball. And then I had an old gear that had broken, which made some nice little saw teeth, and if you come to see the show, you'll see them. And then one day I just pocketed all this wiggly stuff. I didn't know why, but it turns out it looks like water spilling off this charging, open-mouthed thing. I had a blue tripod to put it on, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then again a saw blade and a little collar. And so if Mim hadn't sent me an email, neither one of these would exist, and I would have been sitting on all these perfect parts, not knowing where they should go. So hallelujah, Madeleine Lord, for writing a great book, which I've read and will read again with relish, and for this show, which is really fun and exciting. It's got that wonderful mixture, like Halloween, of spooky and funny at the same time. So congrats to everyone here, and thank you very much.
Having recently read Emily Wilson's translation of the Odyssey and following up with Circe, I continued my use of ancient nautical sea creature imagery with Scylla to exemplify the evil within that is bleeding out in our current state of affairs.
My name is Nora Rabins. This is my piece entitled Manic. The process of making it was very much a process of embracing mosaics, and it's a new medium for me, which I really love. It's been really fun. The process of coming up with the image itself was very roundabout, and ultimately ended up with my going back to an early funky doodle sketch and cropping out a very small image of a monster, an early monster, before I even really read the book. And once I read the book, I realized that this was a lot more intense and deep of a story, but I decided to stick with the funny levity kind of side of things and go with that kind of tragic, comic version, the sort of a comic image, a comic book cover maybe of an image of a monster in a very archetypal way, and in a way that seemed like the monster was kind of innocent and friendly, as well as maybe a little bit absent-minded.
I'm Lisa Redburn. I think of myself as a fine art photographer, but one of the exciting things about this show is it brought out the part of me that really likes to make things with my hands. So I started out thinking, the ugly side, the ugliness revealed. Naturally went to the garden. The garden is very much not just my muse, but kind of my visual creative language. A lot of my work involves pictures of flowers, often transformed. So I watched my lilies do their thing, huge divas, just extraordinary, and then transform into kind of monster-like creatures. And the fact that they had those 6 amazing heads coming out. So I spent a lot of time in the garden getting pollen all over myself, looking up, looking down. But I wasn't so sure it was working for this show. And then I woke up one night at like 4 in the morning and I go, I need to make something 3-dimensional. They need to be able to reach out. So I went and I found a book a friend had lent me, a photographer friend, but a book about making paper flowers. And she hadn't really liked it, and I looked at it and it didn't speak to me. But that night I went down and I found it, and I went through the pages. I was looking for lilies initially, and I came to the page with the opium poppies. And it was like, die! It's like I had always had, I don't right now in my garden in Massachusetts, but I'd always had some opium poppies in my garden, and they're just incredibly delicate. They dance around in the garden. The plants are kind of ugly, and you don't have much control over where they plant themselves. But the real reason I thought it fit this is the very ugly side of opiates or of any addiction. And so it was a really, I hate to say fun, but it was a really fun project to work on because I could do it on my terms, not being overwhelmed by all the horrible things happening in the world and the suffering. And I could actually just be putting color on crepe paper and very gently massaging crepe paper into petal-like forms. It was very calming and meditative. And then wrapping the stems. And then I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do with these poppies? And and I hadn't read very much of the book at that point, but I'd started reading and I go, oh, what about that clay piece I made years ago that's been sitting on a shelf in the back of some area where nobody notices? It always felt like it had openings and it was sort of ugly, but I loved it. And sure enough, something I made years ago needed to be transformed into the cave for Scylla to grow out of. So it's just fascinating how the things you do as an artist, when you do them, you have no idea where they're going. And anyway, so and then I thought, how do I make, so it was a little too pretty, even though I made my poppies dark colors. They were still kind of, I don't know, they still pulled you in. And I thought, all right, but where's the hook? And I said that to myself, oh, we need some hooks. So there's some fish hooks sort of hidden throughout, because that's so much what addiction is, that hook. We're lured by what makes us feel better, and then it doesn't. It ruins our lives.
Hello, everyone. My name is Heather Stivison. I'm a former museum director, now a full-time artist. Welcome to my studio. As you can see from this corner of my studio, I am a reader. Reading informs all of my work, and so I was particularly excited to participate in the big read and interpret the sea monster Scylla as she is portrayed in the novel Circe. while I was reading Circe, I was also reading about race relations and culture wars and white privilege and white fragility and Tulsa race riots and even World War II, all in an effort to understand the hate and anger welling up in our world today. I found myself wondering about the hideous monsters that must lie hidden within us as human beings. What makes them become activated? I began thinking about the hot-cold empathy gap. That's the psychological term describing how visceral emotions can change our actual behaviors in ways we don't understand. Hot emotions transform us into people that we may not even recognize, much like Circe's herbal potion transformed Scylla. So I interpreted the ugliness of the sea monster Scylla through this contemporary lens, using imagery of a swirling storm of oceanic emotion. I began by creating a whirlpool of acrylic paint mixed with thick mediums and applied with a large palette knife. I often use acrylic paint beneath my oils because the thick impasto surfaces take much less time to dry. I wanted the effect to be stormy and dramatic, so I worked quickly, pushing one color into the next, moving the heavy paint around the canvas until it felt right. I used semi-transparent colors, layering them so that the viewer's eyes could travel around and through the layers. And then switching to oils, I painted small images of 6 female faces in the midst of a ghostly transformation, just barely emerging from the forces around them. But I was unsatisfied with the result. Fortunately, the faces were painted in oil, so I scraped them out. And I tried again and again. I moved them around the canvas, grouping them and regrouping them, altering their expressions, adding and removing hands, until they made me very uncomfortable. It's a strange thing to actually want a painting to make you uncomfortable. The edges of the canvas in particular have a certain type of energy, so that when you get close to the edge, it feels uncomfortable, unpleasant, unresolved. So when I made the faint image of the gossiping monster squeezing out from between 2 figures, I leaned her very close to the edge. I thought, bingo, she makes me really uncomfortable. Compositionally, I was also concerned with using 6 faces. An even number tends to feel so static. That's where the large hand helped. It worked visually, and it also said, keep out. A hateful message, insiders versus outsiders. It says, you're unworthy, you're unwelcome, you don't belong. It's like a wall. I use different types of brushwork to echo and enhance the specific energy level and feelings of each emotional monster in the individual process of emerging. The tearful monster here is more carefully rendered, as she represents the fear that overpowers us, breaks us, weakens our resolve, and makes us incapable of action our rational brain tells us is right and true. But the screaming monster was painted quickly with aggressive strokes that underscore the mood. The monster who blocks out the noise is almost vibrating with the sound of those around her. She doesn't want to hear the pain. She doesn't want to hear the voices of others. But the silent monster is rendered slowly, quietly, and may not even seem to be a monster at all. However, she exhibits an emotional paralysis that may make her the worst monster of all. As Martin Luther King said, in the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. Thank you.